What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Showtime, or X. I'm opening up this new YouTube page. I'm gonna call this "Niggas Who Read Books." All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get into some of this book that I'm currently reading. This is War by Robert Greene. I'm just gonna get into some of this chapter. I just cleared one chapter, so I'm on this chapter 25 now. Occupy the moral ground, the righteous strategy. Let me finish this chapter, but if I did finish this chapter already, I'll just read it again, and I'll just probably be going along and discussing things as I read them. So bear with me. This is chapter 25 from Robert Greene's book, War. All right. Occupy the moral ground, the high ground, the righteous strategy. It's a little excerpt. In a political world, the cause you are fighting for must seem more just than the enemy's. Think of this as moral terrain that you and the other side are fighting over. By questioning your enemy's motives and making them appear evil, you can narrow their base of support and room to maneuver. Aim at the soft spots in their public image, exposing any hypocrisies on their part. Never assume that the justice of your cause is self-evident. Publicize and promote it. When you yourself come under a moral attack from a clever enemy, do not whine or get angry. Fight fire with fire. If possible, position yourself as the underdog, the victim, the martyr. Learn to inflict guilt as a moral weapon. The moral offense. In 1513, the 37-year-old Giovanni de' Medici, son of the illustrious Florentine Lorenzo de' Medici, was elected pope and assumed the name Leo X. The church that Leo now led was in many ways the dominant political and economic power in Europe, and Leo, a lover of poetry, theater, and painting, like others in his famous family, wanted to make it also a great patron of the arts. Earlier popes had begun the building of the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome, the preeminent seat of the Catholic Church, but had left the structure unfinished. Leo wanted to complete this mighty project, permanently associating it with his name, but he would need to raise a fair amount of capital to be able to pay for the best artists to work on it. And so, in 1517, Leo launched a campaign to sell indulgences. Then as now, it was Catholic practice for the faithful to confess their sins to their priests, who would enforce their contrition by assigning them a penance, a kind of worldly punishment. Today, this might simply be a prayer or a counting of the rosary, but penances were once more severe, including fasts and pilgrimages, or financial payments known as indulgences. The nobility might pay indulgence in the form of a saintly relic purchased for their church, a large expense that would translate into the promise of a reduced time spent in purgatory after death. Purgatory being a kind of halfway house for those not evil enough for hell, but not good enough for heaven, so forced to wait. The lower class might pay a smaller fee to buy forgiveness for their sins. Indulgences were a major source of church income. For this particular campaign, Leo unleashed a squadron of experts indulgences salesmen across Europe, and the money began to pour in. As his chief architect for the completion of St. Peter's, he appointed the great artist Raphael, who planned to make the building a splendid work of art, Leo's lasting legacy to the world. All was going well until, in October 1517, news reached the Pope that a priest named Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546, some tiresome German theologian, had tacked to the doors of the castle church of Wittenberg a tract called the 95 Thesis. Like many important documents of the time, the tract was originally passed out among the public, and within a few weeks all Germany seemed to have read it. The 95 Thesis was essentially an attack on the practice of selling indulgences. It was up to God, not the church, to forgive sinners, Luther reasoned, and such forgiveness could not be bought. The tract went on to say that the ultimate authority was Scripture. If the Pope could cite Scripture to refute Luther's argument, the priest would gladly recant them. The Pope did not read Luther's writings. He preferred poetry to theological discussion. And a single German priest surely posed no threat to the use of indulgences to fund a worthy project, let alone to the church itself. But Luther seemed to be challenging the church's authority in a broad sense, and Leo knew that an unchecked heresy could become the center of a sect. Within recent centuries in Europe, the church had put down such dissident sects by the use of force. Better to silence Luther before it was too late. Leo began relatively gently, asking the respected Catholic theologian Sylvester Mazzolini, usually known as Parias, to write an official response to Luther that he hoped would frighten the priests into submission. Parias proclaimed that the Pope was the highest authority in the church, even higher than Scripture. In fact, that the Pope was infallible. He quoted various theological texts written over the centuries in support of his claim. He also attacked Luther personally, calling him a bastard and questioning his motives. Perhaps the German priest was angling for a bishopric. Parias concluded with the words, "Whoever says that the Church of Rome may not do what it is actually doing in the manner of indulgences is a heretic. The warning was clear enough. Leo had much on his mind during these years, including turmoil in the Ottoman Empire and a plan to launch a new crusade. But Luther's response to Parias got his attention right away. Luther wrote a text in which he mercilessly took apart Parias' writings. The church, he argued, had failed to answer his charges and to base its arguments on Scripture. Unless its authority in granting indulgences and excommunicating heretics was rooted in the Bible, it was not spiritual in nature, but worldly, political, and that kind of authority could not and should be challenged. Luther published his text alongside Parias', allowing readers to compare the two and come to their own conclusions. His direct quotations of Parias', his audacious and mocking tone, and his use of recently developing printing technology to spread his message far and wide, all this was quite shocking and new to the church officials. They were dealing with a clever and dangerous man. It was now clear to Leo that the war between the church and Luther was a war to the death. As the Pope pondered how to get the German priest to Rome and try him as a heretic, Luther accelerated his campaign, continuing to publish at an alarming rate. His tone ever more vitriolic. In an open letter to the Christian nobility of the German nation, he claimed that Rome had used this spurious authority to bully and cow the German people for centuries, turning Germany's kingdoms into vassal states. The church, he said, again, was a political power, not a spiritual one. And to prop up its worldly rule, it had resorted to lies, forging documents, whatever means necessary. And on the Babylonian captivity of the church, he railed against the Pope's lavish lifestyle, the whoring among church hierarchy, the blasphemous art Leo funded. The Pope had gone so far as to have staged an immoral and bawdy play by Machiavelli called Mandragola within the Vatican itself. Luther juxtaposed the righteous behavior advocated by the church with the way its cardinals actually lived. It was the Pope and his entourage, Luther charged, who were the real heretics, not he. In fact, the Pope was the Antichrist. It seemed to Leo that Luther had responded to Paris's threat by raising the temperature. Clearly the threat had been weak. The Pope had been too lenient. It was time to show real force and end this war. So Leo wrote a papal bull threatening Luther with excommunication. He also sent church officials to Germany to negotiate the priest's arrest and imprisonment. These officials, however, came back with shocking news that altered everything. In a few short years since the publication of the 95 Thesis, Martin Luther, an unknown German priest, had somehow become a sensation, a celebrity, a beloved figure throughout the country. Everywhere the Pope's officials went, they were heckled, even threatened with stoning. Shop windows in almost every German town contained paintings of Luther with a halo over his head. 9/10 of the Germans shout, "Long live Luther," one official reported to Leo, and the other 10th, "Death to Rome." Luther had somehow aroused the German public's latent resentment and hatred of the church, and his reputation was impeccable. He was a best-selling author, yet he refused the income from his writings, clearly practicing what he preached. The more the church attacked him, the more popular Luther became. To make a martyr of him now could spark a revolution. Nevertheless, in 1521, Leo ordered Luther to appear in the town of Worms before the imperial diet, a gathering of German priests, princes, nobles, and clergy, organized by the newly elected Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. Leo hoped to get the Germans to do his dirty work, and Charles was amenable, a political creature, worried by the authoritarian sentiments that Luther had sparked. He wanted the dispute over. At the diet, he demanded that the priest recant his teachings, but Luther, as usual, refused, and in dramatic fashion uttering the memorable line, "Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me." The emperor had no choice. He condemned Luther as a heretic and ordered him to return to Wittenberg to await his fate. On the way home, however, Luther was kidnapped and taken to Warburg Castle. The kidnapping was actually been planned and executed by his many supporters among the aristocracy. He was safe, living in the castle under an assumed name. He was able to ride out the storm. Leo died that year, and within months of his death, Luther's ideas and reforms that he had advocated had spread throughout Germany like wildfire. By 1526, a Protestant party was officially recognized in different parts of Europe. This was the birth of the Reformation, and with it, the vast worldly power of the Catholic Church, at least as Leo had inherited it